During World War II, a pilot named Charlie Bond ferried dozens of military aircraft to Africa and Europe, flying the southern route through Trinidad, Natal, Brazil, Dakar, Africa, and then north to the war zones. After the war, he settled in Venezuela and became a bush pilot. In November 1949, Charlie Bond, then known as the King of the Jungle, flew into the Mina Grande oil camp of San Tomé and offered a tourist excursion to Canaima, Angel Falls, and a mission at Cavanayen, located about 40 miles southeast of Angel Falls. Dorothy and I were intrigued and became part of a group of 20 people who made the trip with Charlie in a DC-3. Typically, the DC-3s flew low and slow and bounced around in the turbulent air. Dorothy was airsick before we reached Ciudad Bolívar, where we stopped for additional passengers and to refuel. My concern was great since Dorothy was 5 months pregnant. However, Dorothy's doctor, Tulio Briseño, was on the trip and assured me that she would be all right if we could control the nausea. Charlie Bond was present and said, "As soon as we are in the air, bring Dorothy up to the cockpit. She can sit in my seat by an open window and the co-pilot can fly the plane." As we climbed for altitude and smoother air, Dorothy sat comfortably in the pilot seat and the trip became enjoyable. When we reached the area of Angel Falls, we found it clouded in. The small tabletop mesa in this photo is known as Uwe Tepui, or Sun Mountain. It is located directly across the valley from Angel Falls. However, the falls, as well as the huge tabletop mesa known as Ayan Tepui, were obscured by the clouds. Charlie Bond decided to head for Cavanayen, home of a Pamon Indian tribe, where we could wait for the cloudy conditions to clear up. Cavanayen is located about 40 miles southeast of Angel Falls and is perched atop a grassy mesa surrounded by dense jungles. The short dirt airstrip ended at the edge of the mesa, and I hoped Charlie would be able to stop the plane before we toppled over the rim. However, Charlie did a fine job of landing and taxied back to the area where the monks were waiting for us. They provided transportation in the form of a wagon towed by a jeep, and we had a wonderful hayride back to the mission. The Capuchin monks founded the mission at Cavanayen just 7 years earlier in 1942. However, their calloused fingers showed they followed their faith by working with their hands, and they were true artisans. The exterior of the masonry chapel was completed, and they were hard at work finishing the interior with exotic lumber carved from the bountiful supply of hardwood jungle trees that surrounded the mesa. These boards may be seen drying under the covered porch attached to the mission building behind Dr. Tulio Briseño, Dorothy, and Jake Howland in the foreground. Their garden contained many varieties of vegetables and fruit, including oranges, bananas, papayas, yucca, and limoncillos, something like a lemon but as large as a grapefruit. They also had a good supply of sweet Venezuelan pineapples. They lightly fermented pineapple juice to make a tasty drink they served at our luncheon. The monks were quite resourceful. Of course, they had a gasoline-driven generator to supply electricity for their power tools, but fuel was expensive and very hard to obtain in their isolated location. Notwithstanding, they installed a turbine below a waterfall at the base of their mesa and connected it to a generator in an attempt to provide hydroelectric power for the mission. However, the connecting drive shaft was too short, and spray from the waterfall shorted out the system. Undaunted, they asked for help from their visitors. Cliff Perry, an executive with the Many Grande Oil Company, assured the monks that a long drive shaft from San Tome machine shop would be shipped on Charlie Bond's next trip to Cavanayen. When I tried to compliment one of the monks on their resourcefulness, he replied, "Everything was here waiting for us to put it to good use." He then led me to an overhanging outcrop at the edge of the mesa. He reached under a strata of rock and scooped out a handful of white kaolin. Kaolin is a mineral consisting mainly of aluminum and silica oxides and other impurities, mainly iron oxides. In its purest form, it is snow white, lacks impurities such as iron oxides, and is used to create the finest chinaware. The sample the monk held before me was pure white, and he smiled as he said, "All I need now is a potter's wheel and a kiln." The monks were waiting for us with a luncheon served under a shed roof attached to the mission building. The menu was rather plain, consisting of fruit and vegetables. Yuca is a staple, and there are two varieties. Yuca dulce is starchy and has a consistency something like Irish potatoes, but it is stringy. Yuca amarga, or bitter yuca, contains a poisonous fluid that smells like cyanide. The grated pulp must be squeezed in a 6-foot-long woven tube about 4 inches in diameter, known as a sabucan. The sabucan is filled with moist, grated yuca and firmly tied to the branch of a tree. Then a stout lever is inserted through a loop at the bottom of the tube, and force is applied to stretch the sabucan. Usually a man is put to work sitting on the lever to provide the force. The sabucan stretches and squeezes the pulp something like the action of a kid's toy known as a Chinese handcuff. The poisonous juice is called yari and contains copious amounts of starch. The lady of the house captures the yari and sets the container aside for a day or two. She then filters the mixture through a cloth to capture the oxidized starch. The barely moist pulp is removed from the sabucan and formed into a huge pancake on a flat steel plate over a fire. The pancake is usually 2 to 3 feet in diameter and is known as cassava. It is flipped once during the toasting process and then stored, usually on the thatched roof of their houses, to dry. Of course, yuca dulce and cassava were part of the luncheon served to us, but delicious sweet bananas, pineapples, and papaya helped make it an enjoyable meal. The monks also served a tangy fruit juice that had been lightly fermented. It certainly was not strong enough to give anyone an alcoholic buzz. However, the monks told us they had to be careful that the Pemon Indians did not get their hands on it. Just a little was sufficient to put them under, like they occasionally did when drinking fermented yuca dulce juice called chicha. Following the meal, we noted that a group of young Pemon Indian girls had silently filed in and had taken their place in a far corner. One of the monks introduced the group and told us they were going to sing a song extolling the beauties and wonders of the Grand Savannah. The leader blew his pitch pipe. The girls sang the song, composed by the monks, in Spanish. We were highly impressed by the talent of the young girls and the sensitive quality of the monks' composition as well. Following the luncheon, Captain Charlie Bond announced, "The weather is clearing and it's time to take off for Angel Falls." We loaded aboard our flatbed bus and were carried first to the Pemon Indian village. The men offered bows and arrows and blowpipes for sale, and the takeoff was postponed until several transactions could be completed. Later, as we unloaded at the airplane, the ladies noticed several yellow flowers dotting the landscape and asked Charlie Bond, "What kind of flowers are they?" Charlie picked one and looked at it carefully. The women squealed with delight when he said, "These are ground orchids." Sure enough, the small blossoms on a 4 to 6 inch stem had all the classic features of the orchid flower. The color was basically canary yellow with a tinge of cocoa brown. They were indeed beautiful, and everything was put on hold until all the women picked a nosegay of the lovely miniature orchids. Far to the northeast, we could see the huge mesa known as Ayan Tepuy, or Devil Mountain. It is the largest of the tabletop mesas in Venezuela and covers an area of 400 square miles. The top of the mesa is about 8,000 feet above sea level. We could see there were many clouds hanging over the mesa, and we hoped luck would be with us to enable to see the highest waterfall in the world, known as Angel Falls.